The men who brought it came from New Jersey, and they wanted light and got it. And Yorkburg was so pleased that it moved a little and made some light for itself, and now everything in town just blazes, even the asylum. I used to sleep in number 4, but I don't sleep there now. It is a big room and has 6 windows in it, and in winter we children used to play we were Arctic explorers and would search for icebergs. The North Pole was the Reagans' house halfway down the street, and it might as well have been, for it was as much beyond our reach. But it was the one thing we were all going to get some day when we married rich, and when we got it, we were going to drive up to the Galt house, that's the home for poor and proud ladies, and ask for Mrs. Reagan, who was to be in it in the 3rd floor back, and leave her some old clothes with the buttons off and old magazines. None of us could bear Mrs. Reagan, not a single one. It is a beautiful house, Mrs. Reagan's is. It has large white pillars in the front and back, and it's got 3 bathrooms and a big tank in the backyard, and it has velvet curtains over the lace ones, and gold furniture, and pictures with gold frames a foot wide. I heard Miss Katherine talking about it to Miss Webb one night. They were laughing about something Miss Katherine said was the most impossible of all, and Miss Webb said it was desecrating for such a stately old house to fall into the hands of such Bulgarians. What are Bulgarians? I don't know, but they're not ladies. Mrs. Reagan is not a lady. The way I found it out was this. Miss Jones, she's our housekeeper, sent a message to her one day by Bertha Reed and me about some pickles. Bertha is awful timid, and she didn't know whether or not we ought to go to the front door. But I did, and I told her to come on. I don't go to back doors if I don't know my family history, I said. I know who I am, and something inside of me tells me where to go. And I pressed the button so hard I thought I'd broken it unintentional. The manservant opened the door and looked at us as if weary and surprised, and said nothing. "Is Mrs. Reagan in?" I asked. "She is." That's all he said. He waited. I waited. Then I stepped forward. "We will come in," I said, "and you go and tell her Mary Cary would like to see her, having a message from Miss Jones." And he was so surprised he moved aside, and in I walked. I had heard so much about this house that I wasn't going to miss seeing what was in it, if that fool man was rude. So while he was gone to get Mrs. Reagan, I counted everything in the front parlor as quick as I could, and told Bertha to count everything in the back. There were 3 sofas and 2 mirrors and 9 chairs and 6 rugs and 6 tables and 2 pianos, one little old-fashioned one and a big new one, and 3 stools and 17 candlesticks and 4 pedestals with statuary on them, some broken, all naked, and 7 palms and 23 pictures and 2 lamps and 5 red plush curtains, 3 pairs over the lace ones and 2 at the doors. And as for ornaments, it was a shop. And not one single book. I am sure I got the things right, for I'd been practicing remembering at observation parties, in case I ever got a chance to see inside this house, and I looked hard so I could tell the girls. Poor Bertha was so frightened she didn't remember anything but the clock and a china cat and an easel and picture, and before I could count, Mrs. Reagan came in. She stopped in the doorway, and had we come from Leperland, she couldn't have held herself farther off. "What are you doing in here?" she asked, and she tried the haughty air. "What are you doing in here?" "We were waiting for you," I said. "We have a message from Miss Jones." "Well, another time don't wait in here, and don't come to the front door if you have a message from Miss Jones or Miss anybody else. I don't want any pickles this year. Had I wanted any, I would have sent her word. You understand? Don't ever come here again in this way." And she waved us out as if we were flies. For a minute I looked at her as if she were a Mrs. Jorley's waxworks, and then I made a bow like I make in charades. "We understand," I said, "and we will not come again. We've heard a good many people in Yorkburg have been once and no more." And I bowed again and walked past her like she was a stage character, which she was, being a pretense and nothing else. Mad? I tell you I was Martha for a week, and then I saw real sudden how silly I was to let a Bulgarian make me mad. But if I'm ever expected to love anything like that, it will be expecting too much of Mary Cary, mostly Martha, for she isn't an enemy. She's just a make-believe of something she wasn't born into being and don't know how to make herself. She don't agree with my nature, and if I had a parlor she couldn't come into it either. She could not.
End of chapter 3. Recording by Jan McGillivray.